Rancher sat alone with a hungry baby after his wife passed, until a stranger knocked, carrying milk and mercy. Story is based on tragedy, a redemption, a hope, Western romance. Late 1800s, Montana frontier, an isolated ranch miles from the nearest town. The Montana wind had a way of whispering through the trees like a lost soul. That morning, it carried with it the sharp bite of snow and the faint scent of pine. The mountains stood solemn and silent, their peaks veiled in low clouds. Inside a lonely log cabin halfway up a ridge, Eli Turner sat motionless beside a cradle carved from pine. His face was hollow, unshaven, and his eyes, once the color of clear river water, had dulled to gray. The fire had burned low, casting a dim orange light that trembled across the wooden walls. From the cradle came a weak, pitiful cry. Eli's baby boy, Samuel, turned his tiny head and whimpered. His cheeks were sunken, his lips dry. The bottle on the table sat untouched, the milk inside gone sour. Eli reached for it again as if trying the same hopeless ritual one more time. "Come on, little one," he whispered, voice cracked from days without rest. "Please. For your ma's sake, try." The baby turned away, whimpering softly. Eli leaned back in his chair, running his rough hands over his face. He hadn't slept more than an hour at a time since Mary, his wife, had passed. The memory of that night still haunted every breath. The midwife had come too late. The blood loss was too much. By dawn, Mary was gone, and the house that once rang with her laughter had fallen into a silence that clawed at him like a wild thing. He looked toward the window where her shawl still hung, the wind fluttering its corner through a small crack in the frame. Her scent, lavender and wood smoke, still lingered faintly. He swallowed hard, eyes burning. "Lord," he murmured, "I buried the best part of me last week. Don't take the rest too." The baby's cries grew weaker, almost fading to silence. Panic seized Eli's chest. He lifted Samuel gently and pressed him close, pacing the floorboards like a man lost at sea. The boards creaked beneath his boots. The wind moaned outside, pressing against the shutters. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes, it was hard to tell anymore. The light dimmed, dusk swallowing the valley. Snow began to fall, soft and relentless. Then, a knock. Eli froze. His heart jolted in his chest. Out here, miles from the nearest road, no one ever knocked. He turned toward the door, unsure if he'd imagined it. Then came another, 3 sharp raps that cut through the storm. He set the baby back in the cradle, grabbed his rifle from the wall and moved cautiously to the door. "Who's there?" he called, voice rough. Through the whistling wind came a woman's voice, strained and trembling. "Please? I need help." The stagecoach overturned by the creek. "I can't go any farther." Eli hesitated. Could be a trick. But then the voice cracked with desperation. "There's a child, please?" He yanked the door open, and the wind rushed in, cold and wild. A woman stood on the porch, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her face. She clutched a bundle of blankets tight against her chest. Behind her, the snow fell in thick sheets, already covering the tracks that had brought her there. Her lips trembled as she met his eyes. "I saw your light." For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the sound of the wind and the faint whimper from inside her arms. Then Eli stepped aside. "Get in." She stumbled through the doorway, collapsing near the fire. Eli shut the door against the storm, his heart pounding. The woman knelt beside the hearth, shivering. She was young, perhaps his age, maybe younger, with gentle eyes that spoke of exhaustion more than fear. She loosened the blanket, revealing a baby girl no older than Samuel, bundled tight but crying softly. Eli's breath caught. 2 babies in one house, the thought felt unreal. "I'm Clara Dawson," she said through chattering teeth. "I was bound for Bozeman. The coach hit ice, went down the embankment. I walked until I saw the light in your window." He nodded, still staring at the infant. "You're lucky to be alive." She gave a weak laugh. "Luck or providence? I don't know which anymore." Eli knelt beside the fire, adding more wood until the flames brightened. Clara's skin was pale, her hands shaking. He poured her a tin cup of coffee and handed it over. "You've got a babe," he said quietly. She nodded, smiling faintly at the child. "Her name's Anna. She's hungry, but thank heaven she still feeds." Eli's gaze fell to Samuel, who whimpered from his cradle. "Mine won't," he whispered almost to himself. Clara looked toward the cradle, her eyes softening. "How old?" 2 weeks. Her expression changed, something between sorrow and understanding. "Your wife. She passed." His voice broke on the words. A silence filled the room, deep and heavy. The fire crackled, the wind moaned against the door. Clara's eyes filled with quiet sympathy. "I'm sorry." Eli swallowed hard, looking away. "He won't take the bottle. I've tried every way I can think of. He's fading." Clara hesitated, her maternal instinct sparking. She looked from Samuel to Anna, then back again. "Let me try something," she said softly. Eli frowned. "What do you mean?" She met his eyes. "Sometimes, a baby just needs a mother's warmth. Let me hold him." He hesitated. Every instinct screamed to protect his child, yet something in her voice, gentle, steady, sure, broke through his fear. He lifted Samuel from the cradle and handed him over. Clara cradled the tiny boy close, rocking him gently. She whispered lullabies, words too soft to catch, and after a moment, Samuel stopped crying. Eli felt the air shift. The cabin that had felt like a tomb moments before now breathed with new life. The baby sighed, his tiny hand clutching Clara's sleeve. Clara looked up at Eli, her eyes shimmering in the firelight. "He's just hungry," she said softly. "That's all." Eli stood there, speechless, a lump tightening in his throat. He turned away, blinking hard as tears finally fell. Tears he hadn't been able to shed even when he buried Mary. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, two strangers sat by the fire, each holding a child, each carrying their own loss. And yet, for the first time in a long, bitter winter, the cabin was not silent. It was alive again. The storm raged through the night, but inside the cabin, something had shifted. The air was softer now, warmed not just by the fire, but by the faint rhythm of two babies breathing in unison. Eli sat at the table, his elbows resting on his knees, watching the woman by the hearth. Clara Dawson. She changed into one of Mary's old shawls, the blue one that still smelled faintly of lilac. It hung loosely around her shoulders as she rocked both infants, her own Anna in one arm, little Samuel in the other. The sight was almost too much for Eli to bear. For a heartbeat, it looked like his wife had never gone, like life had simply gone on, unbroken. He turned his face toward the fire, gripping his hat in both hands. "You didn't have to stay up," he muttered. Clara smiled faintly. "Neither did you." The firelight danced across her face, highlighting the softness of her features, the faint freckles at the bridge of her nose, the weariness in her eyes that spoke of too many miles traveled and too many nights without rest. "I'm used to it," she continued, her voice gentle. "After my husband passed, Anna wouldn't sleep unless I held her. Guess she still remembers that kind of comfort." Eli looked up sharply. "You're a widow?" She nodded once, her gaze fixed on the fire. 6 months now. He was a farmhand in Tennessee. Fever took him before the harvest came in. After that, I had nothing left there. My sister in Bozeman offered to take us in. She paused, brushing her thumb against Anna's tiny cheek. I was supposed to start over. Then the stagecoach tipped. Maybe, she gave a tired laugh, maybe the Lord had a different road in mind. Eli's throat tightened. He looked toward Samuel, who was finally sleeping soundly in Clara's arm, his little face pink and peaceful. "That's the first rest he's had since." He couldn't finish. The words tangled and fell apart in his chest. Clara looked up at him with quiet understanding. "Grief makes time stand still," she said softly. "But babies don't stop needing us. They pull us forward whether we're ready or not." Her words hit something deep inside him. He turned to the window where the snow was still falling in heavy sheets and whispered almost to himself, "I buried her under that oak out back. Couldn't bring myself to leave her side." Then the baby stopped eating. Thought maybe it was the Lord's way of saying he was taking them both. Clara shook her head gently. "No, Mr. Turner. I don't think the Lord's in the business of taking. I think he's in the business of sending." Their eyes met across the glow of the fire, and Eli couldn't look away. There was no pity in her gaze, only a strange, quiet strength that felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For the first time since Mary's death, he didn't feel entirely alone. By morning the storm had calmed. The world outside was hushed under a fresh blanket of white. Eli stepped out onto the porch to fetch water from the barrel, the cold air biting at his skin. When he came back in, Clara was humming, a low, soothing melody that seemed to fill every empty corner of the room. Samuel stirred, eyes fluttering open. Clara smiled and handed him gently to Eli. "He's hungry again," she said with a soft chuckle. "That's a good sign." Eli held his son close, unsure how to thank her. "If you hadn't come last night?" he began, but the words caught in his throat. Clara shook her head. "If I hadn't come, I'd be frozen out there by now. We both needed saving, Mr. Turner. Maybe that's how heaven works. One lost soul leads another home." He didn't know what to say. So he just nodded, the corners of his mouth twitching toward the smallest smile. Later that afternoon, Clara insisted on tidying up the cabin while Eli repaired a broken hinge on the barn door. She moved through the home with gentle reverence, folding blankets, sweeping dust, rearranging things with the quiet care of someone who knew the weight of loss. When Eli came back in, she was boiling water for coffee. "I don't mean to step where I don't belong," she said as he entered, "but this home feels sad. Like it's waiting for something." Eli removed his gloves, his voice low. "It's waiting for her." Clara hesitated, eyes on the table. "And maybe it's waiting for life again too." The words hit him harder than she knew. As night fell, the babies slept side by side in the same cradle, their tiny hands brushing against each other. Clara sat by the fire, mending a tear in her shawl, while Eli leaned against the wall watching the flames. For a long time neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't cold, it was the kind of silence that understands pain, that gives space for it to breathe. Finally Eli broke it. "You planning to head to Bozeman once the road's clear?" She looked at the babies, then back at him. But I'll stay until you can manage the little one again." He nodded slowly. "I appreciate that." Clara smiled faintly. "Don't thank me yet. You'll soon find out I talk too much and bake terrible biscuits." Eli actually laughed, a sound he hadn't made in weeks. It surprised both of them. Clara glanced over, amused. There it is. Proof the man can smile. He shook his head, a trace of warmth in his eyes. "Been a while since anyone gave me a reason to." The fire popped, sending a spray of sparks upward. Outside, the wind quieted to a whisper, and inside, something unspoken began to grow, not love yet, but something gentler. Something that felt like the first step out of grief. And that night, long after Clara had fallen asleep with both children nestled beside her, Eli stood by the door, staring out at the moonlit snow. He thought of his wife, of her voice, her laughter, her final breath. Then he thought of the woman who had arrived at his door with the storm, carrying milk, mercy, and a quiet grace that felt heaven-sent. Eli whispered into the stillness, "Thank you, for sending her." By the time the snow melted from the mountain ridge, the cabin no longer echoed with silence. It rang with soft laughter, with the creak of floorboards beneath hurried footsteps, and with the sweet, steady hum of a woman's song drifting through the open window. Winter had passed, and with it, the hollow stillness that once haunted Eli Turner's home. He stood outside by the fence line, mending a section that the storm had torn down. His hands were rough and scarred, but they worked steady, methodical. From inside he could hear Clara humming, some tune from back east that he didn't recognize, but it carried warmth, like sunshine and sound. The babies were older now, plump and smiling, their coos and babbles filling the air. Samuel, once so frail, now kicked his legs with strength, and Anna, ever curious, had learned to grab anything within reach, especially Samuel's blanket. Eli paused from his work, leaning on the post, watching the smoke curl from the chimney. The cabin looked different these days, windows clean, curtains washed, the porch swept. Even the garden Mary had once planted was stirring again with green shoots poking through thawed soil. Inside, Clara was kneeling by the hearth, laughing softly as the two infants lay side by side on a blanket. "Now, Samuel Turner," she said mock stern, "you keep those little hands to yourself. Miss Anna doesn't fancy her curls being tugged again." Samuel gurgled in response, a string of happy babbles spilling from his mouth. Clara laughed and tickled his chin. Eli stepped inside, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Looks like you've got your hands full." Clara looked up with a grin that reached her eyes. "You say that every day, and every day you're right." He smiled, small but real. "Good sound to come home to." She tilted her head. "And what sound would that be?" He nodded toward the babies. "Life." For a moment, silence lingered, soft and warm, not heavy like before. Then Clara rose, brushing flour from her apron. "Dinner's nearly ready," she said. "Hope you don't mind rabbit stew again." Eli shrugged. "As long as it's warm and doesn't kick back, I'll eat it." Clara chuckled. "Fair enough." That evening they ate by lamplight. The babies slept in the cradle beside the fire, the two of them close enough to touch, their tiny hands resting together. Clara caught sight of it and smiled. "They don't even know they ain't kin," she said softly. Eli followed her gaze. "Maybe that's the beauty of it. They don't need to." The crackle of the fire filled the quiet. Eli leaned back in his chair, studying her face in the golden glow. He noticed how the light caught the gold strands in her hair, how her eyes softened when she spoke of the children. She noticed him watching and raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" He hesitated, then shook his head. Nothing. Just, thank you. For staying longer than you planned. Her hands stilled on the tablecloth. I told myself it was just until the roads cleared, she said. But somehow, I can't seem to go. Eli's voice was quiet. Maybe you were meant to come. She looked up at him then, and for the first time neither looked away. Days turned into weeks, and their rhythms settled like a well-worn dance. Eli rose early to tend the horses, while Clara made biscuits in the faint dawn light. The babies would stir soon after, their cries soft but insistent, and Eli would come back inside to the sight of Clara with both little ones in her lap, humming them calm. He began to notice the small things, how her laughter filled the house, how her hands worked with quiet confidence, how she spoke kindly to every creature on the ranch, even the stubborn mule that bit at her skirt. Once, when he found her trying to lift a sack of feed twice her size, he rushed to help. "Let me do that," he said, reaching for it. She wiped her brow. "You think just 'cause I'm a woman I can't lift a bit of grain?" He smirked. "I think just 'cause you're half my size, you shouldn't try to break your back over it." She laughed, setting the sack down. "Fair point. Guess I still got something to learn about ranch life." He paused. "You're learning faster than I did." She looked at him then, something quiet and proud in her smile. "That's kind of you to say, Eli Turner." That night, after both babies had fallen asleep, Eli found himself outside on the porch again. The sky was clear, the stars endless above the valley. Clara stepped out quietly, wrapping Mary's shawl around her shoulders. "You always come out here after dark," she said softly. "Why?" He took a deep breath, looking out over the snow-lit fields. "Mary used to say the stars were prayers waiting to be answered. Guess I just come out to make sure mine ain't been forgotten." Clara looked up at the same sky, her eyes glistening. "Maybe one of those prayers brought me here." He turned to her, his voice low. "You believe that?" "I have to," she whispered. "It's the only thing that makes sense of all the pain we've walked through." Eli looked at her then, really looked, and felt something stir in his chest he hadn't felt since before Mary's passing. It wasn't guilt this time. It wasn't grief. It was peace. They stood in silence beneath the stars, two hearts that had been broken in different ways, now beating quietly in the same rhythm. And from inside the cabin came the faintest sound, a soft, sleepy cry. Clara turned, already moving toward the door, and Eli watched her go with a faint smile. The wind carried her humming back to him, gentle, steady, full of life. For the first time in a long time, Eli Turner didn't feel like the last man alive in the mountains. He felt found. Spring brought warmth to the valley and color back to the land. The river, once frozen solid, now ran wild and clear, its waters singing as they tumbled over stone. Wildflowers crept up through the fields, painting the earth in patches of gold and blue. And for a time life on the Turner ranch felt almost perfect. Clara laughed more now, truly laughed, the kind of laughter that spilled from somewhere deep, shaking off months of fear and uncertainty. The babies were healthy and growing fast, their giggles filled the cabin like music. Eli had never known such peace. He worked long days in the fields, mending fences, branding calves, and teaching Clara to handle the horses. She learned quickly, surprising him at every turn. "You were born for this," he told her once as she managed to saddle the old chestnut mare by herself. She smiled, brushing hair from her face. "No, Mr. Turner. I was born to survive. The rest I'm learning from you." He'd looked at her then, a long moment of silence passing between them, a silence that said more than words could ever manage. But peace in the West never lasted long. One gray afternoon, Eli spotted a rider in the distance, a lone figure cutting across the open range, kicking up dust as he rode hard toward the ranch. He wiped his hands on his shirt, squinting against the sun. Few folks came this way without reason. When the rider finally slowed and dismounted, Eli recognized him, Hank Brewer, one of the hands from town. The man's face was windburned and tight with something that looked like unease. "Afternoon, Turner," Hank greeted, his tone cautious. Eli nodded. "Afternoon. What brings you out here?" Hank shifted in his saddle, glancing toward the cabin where Clara's figure moved behind the window. "Heard talk in town. Thought you ought to know." "About what?" "About that woman stayin' with you." Eli's jaw tightened. "Careful how you say that, Hank." The man held up his hands. "Ain't my business what you do, Turner. But word is that stagecoach crash a while back. The driver made it to Bozeman. He's tellin' folks one of the passengers took off with a satchel full of money that wasn't hers." Eli's stomach dropped. "And you think that's Clara?" Hank hesitated. "Didn't say her name, but it fits." A woman with a baby walking off into the storm. Folks are saying she ran with the cash and left the rest for dead. Eli's voice hardened. You're wrong. She's no thief. Hank shrugged. Maybe. But there's talk of a deputy coming through soon looking to ask questions. Figured you'd want to be ready. Eli said nothing. His fingers curled around the fence post, splinters biting into his skin. Hank adjusted his hat. You've always been a fair man, Turner. Just watch yourself. He rode off, leaving only dust in his wake. Eli stood there for a long time before going inside. Clara was at the table, spoon-feeding Anna while Samuel kicked in his cradle. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. You're back early. He didn't smile back. His hat hung heavy in his hands. Clara, he began, voice low. I need you to tell me the truth. About that stagecoach. Her smile faded. The spoon froze halfway to Anna's mouth. What about it? The driver lived, Eli said quietly. He's saying one of the passengers took off with money that wasn't theirs. Clara set the spoon down, her hands trembling. Eli. Just tell me if it's true, he said, not harshly, but with the weight of a man who'd been lied to before. Clara's eyes filled with tears. It's not what they think. Please believe me. He waited. She took a shaky breath, clutching the edge of the table. The money was mine. My husband worked as a ranch hand for a man named Wheeler back in Tennessee. After he died, Wheeler said there was no pay left, no savings. But I knew better. He kept the wages locked in a chest for months, said he'd give it when the harvest was done. Her voice broke. When I went to collect, he tried to make me earn it in other ways. Eli's eyes darkened. I took what my husband earned, she whispered. Every cent of it. Then I ran. The stagecoach was my only way out. When it crashed, I had one thought, to save my baby. That money's all I have left to start again. Silence filled the room. The only sound was the fire snapping in the hearth and the baby's breathing softly. Eli took a slow breath, his anger fading into something else. Sorrow, maybe? Understanding. Clara, he moved closer, his voice soft. You did what you had to do. She looked up at him, tears streaking her face. You believe me? I do. The words came out firm and steady, because he did. Everything in her eyes told him the truth. Clara broke then, covering her face as the weight she'd carried for months finally cracked. Eli hesitated only a second before placing his hand gently on her shoulder. You're safe here, he said quietly. No one's gonna take what's yours, not while I'm breathing. She turned toward him, eyes full of gratitude and disbelief. Why? 'Cause I know what it's like to lose everything, he murmured. And I won't stand by while it happens to someone else. That night, after both babies had fallen asleep, Eli sat by the fire, sharpening his knife in silence. The steady scrape of steel against stone echoed in the room. Clara sat across from him, mending one of Samuel's tiny shirts. The quiet between them wasn't the same as before. It was heavier now, forged by truth and shared pain. At last Eli broke it. If that deputy comes, we'll tell him you've been here all along. That you lost everything in the wreck. He can't prove otherwise. She looked up sharply. You'd lie for me? He met her gaze. No. I'd protect you. There's a difference. Clara didn't know what to say. Her throat tightened, her hands trembling as she threaded the needle. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley, slow, distant, but growing nearer. Inside, two broken souls sat in silence, their fates now bound tighter than either had planned. And though neither dared speak it aloud, both knew the truth. Whatever storm came next, they would face it together. The storm that had rumbled beyond the mountains finally broke at dawn. Rain came first, soft at the start, whispering against the cabin roof, then turned fierce, drumming like hooves across the plains. The wind howled through the cottonwoods, bending them near double. Inside, Eli stirred the fire to keep it alive. He'd woken early, uneasy for reasons he couldn't name. The air felt wrong, thick with that kind of stillness that comes before trouble. He crossed to the cradle where Samuel lay, bundled tight. The baby's cheeks were flushed, his breathing shallow and quick. Clara, Eli called softly. She was already awake, sitting up on the edge of the bed with Anna in her arms. Her hair was unbraided, falling loose around her face. I know, she whispered before he could speak. He's burning up. Eli reached down and touched Samuel's forehead. Heat seared his palm. Lord above, he muttered. How long? Since the middle of the night, she said. He cried so hard he went hoarse. I tried cool cloths but the fever won't break. Eli looked toward the window. The rain was thick as smoke. There was no riding into town, not now. The doctor lived nearly 10 miles away and the roads would be mud by the hour. Clara rocked Samuel in her arms, whispering soft prayers under her breath. Eli knelt beside her, helpless in a way he hadn't felt since losing his wife. The same fear clawed at his chest, that cold, merciless feeling of being too late. Hours passed in a blur of thunder and worry. The fever climbed higher. Clara stripped the baby down to his undershirt, dipping rags in cool water and pressing them gently against his skin. "Stay with me, sweetheart," she murmured. "Mama's here. Just hold on." Eli watched her, his heart aching. He'd seen strong men break in the field, but never had he seen strength like this, a woman fighting despair with nothing but faith and trembling hands. When the child's breathing hitched, Clara panicked. "He's not talking, enough air." Eli moved fast, taking Samuel in his big, calloused hands. "Easy now. He's still with us." He rubbed the boy's back gently, coaxing tiny breaths through the rattle in his chest. Clara held a cup of boiled water near the fire, letting the steam rise. "Hold him close to this, maybe it'll help clear him." The cabin filled with warmth and worry, the two of them working in quiet rhythm. By nightfall the storm had eased but the fever hadn't. Samuel's cries had faded to weak whimpers. Clara sat on the floor, rocking him back and forth, her tears soaking the little blanket. Eli paced by the window, fists clenching at his sides. He hated feeling useless. Hated the memory that threatened to surface, of his wife Sarah, sick in that same bed years ago, fever stealing her breath while he could do nothing but watch. He couldn't lose another soul. Not again. Then Clara's voice broke through his thoughts. "Eli, pray with me." He froze. "What? Please." Her voice shook. "I know you stopped believing after she passed. But I need you now. He needs you." The fire flickered between them. For a long moment Eli said nothing. Then slowly he knelt beside her, bowing his head. His voice was rough, uncertain, but sincere. "Lord, you've taken near everything from me already. But if you've got any mercy left, spare this child. Don't let Clara suffer the way I did. Don't take him too." Clara's quiet sobs filled the space between the words. They stayed there for what felt like hours, her whispering lullabies, him keeping watch, until at last, near midnight, Samuel's breathing evened out. Clara froze, afraid to hope. Eli touched the boy's cheek. The heat had faded. "His fever's breakin'," he said softly. Clara's head dropped, relief flooding her body so fast she nearly collapsed. Eli caught her, steadying her in his arms. She clung to him, trembling. "Thank you. Thank you." He held her close, feeling the quiet rise and fall of her breath against him. "Don't thank me. You're the one who never gave up." When morning came, sunlight slipped through the cracks of the shutters, golden and gentle. Samuel slept soundly in the cradle, his little chest rising steady and strong. Clara moved about the room with a new kind of stillness, calm, grateful, changed. Eli stepped outside, staring at the mountains washed clean by rain. The ranch looked almost new again, the earth breathing after the storm. He took off his hat, running a hand through his hair. For the first time in years he whispered a thank you to heaven. When he came back inside, Clara was there by the fire, watching him. "You prayed when it mattered," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Guess some things don't stay buried forever." Their eyes met. No words, just understanding. Because both of them knew the truth now. Sometimes mercy came not as a miracle, but as the person who refused to leave when the world went dark. The days that followed Samuel's recovery were bright and peaceful. The grass in the pasture shimmered green again, and the newborn calves bawled from the far fence lines. The air smelled of pine and smoke and the promise of spring. Eli had never seen Clara smile so freely. She laughed at the way Anna tugged on her apron strings, and she hummed while hanging clothes on the line, sunlight catching in her hair. For the first time since the funeral, the cabin felt like a home again. But the West was a place where peace came with a price. And sometimes the world didn't let you forget your past, no matter how far you ran. It happened 3 mornings later. Eli was in the barn sharpening tools when he heard hoofbeats, slow, steady, official. He knew the sound instantly, a lawman's ride. He stepped out into the light just as a tall rider in a tan duster pulled up to the gate. The man dismounted, dusting his coat and tipping his hat. "Eli Turner?" he called. "That's me. Deputy Marshal Cole Walker, out of Bozeman." Eli nodded cautiously. "You've come a long way, Deputy. What's the business?" The marshal glanced toward the cabin, where a faint outline of Clara moved behind the curtain. "I'm looking for a woman who survived a stagecoach crash near Sweetwater Pass 3 months back. Name's Clara McGill." Eli didn't blink. "Can't say I've heard of her." Walker tilted his head slightly as if weighing the lie. Funny thing, witnesses said she was traveling with an infant. And I see you've got one here. Eli crossed his arms, his stance quiet but firm. That baby's mine. Is that so? It is. The marshal's eyes softened a fraction, but his tone stayed steady. I'm not here to cause trouble, Turner. There's a merchant back east claiming a large sum was stolen before that wreck. Says the woman might have carried it off. Eli's jaw tightened. You think a mother barely alive after a crash would steal a man's money? Wouldn't be the first time desperation drove someone to wrong choices, the deputy said evenly. Look, if she's innocent, she's got nothing to fear. I just need to speak with her. Eli said nothing for a long while. The silence stretched between them, heavy as the sky before rain. Finally he sighed. Let me get her. Inside the cabin, Clara froze when Eli stepped through the door. Clara, he said quietly, there's a deputy outside. Says he's come about the stagecoach. Her hands went cold. He found me. Listen, Eli said gently. You tell him the truth. I'll stand beside you. Clara shook her head, panic rising. If he takes me, they'll never let me prove I didn't steal. They'll hang me before I get the chance. Eli's voice softened. Not while I'm here. Outside, Clara stepped into the light, the wind tugging her shawl. The deputy removed his hat politely. Mrs. McGill, he greeted. I appreciate you speaking with me. Clara's voice trembled but stayed steady. I've done nothing wrong, sir. I hope that's true, Walker said kindly. But I've got to ask where you came by the money found in your satchel. The merchant Wheeler swore it was his. Her chin lifted, defiant through fear. That money was earned by my husband before he died. Wheeler kept it from me. I took only what was mine. The deputy studied her face. You have proof? Clara shook her head. All I have are memories and a child to feed. Walker sighed, rubbing his jaw. Mrs. McGill, I've chased enough men across these plains to know a liar when I see one. You don't look like one. Eli stepped forward. Then let her be. The marshal looked at him, the weight of duty in his eyes. Can't just let her go without reporting in. But I can write that the case found no grounds for arrest. She's far from any danger now. Eli's shoulders eased. That'll do. Walker tipped his hat. You take care of her, Turner. World's been cruel enough. I intend to. The marshal mounted up, turning his horse toward the road. As he rode off, Clara's knees gave way and Eli caught her before she hit the ground. She sobbed into his chest, shaking with relief. It's over, he whispered, his hand on her back. He's gone. No, she choked out. You saved me again. Eli looked down at her, voice low and sure. We saved each other. That night the air was clear and cool. The babies slept peacefully by the fire. Eli and Clara sat on the porch, watching the stars blink awake over the valley. For a long while they said nothing. Then Clara spoke softly. Do you ever think God sends us where we're needed most, not where we plan to go? Eli looked at her, the starlight catching in her eyes. Maybe that's all he ever does. Their hands brushed, a fleeting touch, but it said everything words couldn't. Somehow, after all the storms and shadows, they had found their way to the same light. Summer came early that year. The valley, once heavy with storm and sorrow, now shimmered under sunlight. The creek behind the cabin ran strong again, carrying wildflowers downstream, and the meadows were alive with bees. The Turner Ranch, once silent, haunted by loss, now echoed with laughter. Anna toddled across the porch steps, chasing a kitten that Eli had rescued from the barn. Samuel, healthy and round-cheeked, gurgled in Clara's lap, gripping her fingers tight. From a distance, the sight could have been mistaken for any ordinary family. But both adults knew it had been anything but an easy road to get here. Eli leaned against the porch post, hat tilted back, watching Clara hum softly as she rocked the babies. He still wasn't used to the way her presence softened everything. The home, the air, even the sound of the wind through the trees. She had filled every empty corner his grief had left behind. You've been quiet this morning, Clara said, glancing at him. Just thinking, he replied. About what? He smiled faintly. About how this place don't feel so lonely anymore. Clara's eyes softened. That's because you let someone in. He nodded. Maybe so. Took me long enough. She chuckled, her voice light and warm, but then her gaze turned thoughtful, almost hesitant. Eli, I've been wondering something. What's that? When you took me and the babies in, did you ever think it'd turn into this? He thought for a long moment, then shook his head. No. I just saw someone standing in the cold, holding a hungry child, and something in me said not to let him walk away. Clara smiled through tears. And I almost did. Walk away, I mean. The first night. I know, he said softly. But I'm glad you didn't. They shared a quiet look that said everything neither dared to put into words. As the days passed, they fell into a rhythm that felt natural. Him in the fields, her tending the home. When work ended, they'd sit on the porch watching the sky catch fire at sunset, the babies nestled between them. Sometimes Eli caught himself imagining things. Clara's hair silver in old age, Samuel and Anna running through the tall grass, laughter echoing through the years. It scared him at first, that hope. But he didn't push it away anymore. Because for the first time, hope didn't hurt. One evening, as fireflies blinked along the fence line, Clara came outside with something in her hands. A small, folded letter sealed with wax. I'm sending this to the sheriff, she said quietly. It's for Wheeler. I want him to know I'm alive, and that I forgive him. Eli looked at her, surprised. After what he did? She nodded. Forgiven ain't for him, Eli. It's for me. I don't want bitterness raising my children. He studied her a long moment, then said softly, You've got more courage than most men I've met. Clara smiled. Maybe I just learned it from the right man. The silence that followed was tender, not awkward, not uncertain. Just full of something true. Weeks later, a soft rain came through the valley, and the world smelled new again. Eli stood at the edge of the corral, watching the clouds drift low, thinking of everything that had changed, everything that had healed. Clara walked up behind him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Storms moving east, she said. Yeah, he murmured. Guess we've seen enough storms for one lifetime. She stepped closer, close enough that her hand brushed his arm. Eli. He turned. Her eyes were steady, shining. I don't reckon the good Lord sent me here by mistake. He searched her face, the strength there, the gentleness. The woman who'd walked into his life with nothing but a crying child and courage enough to start again. I don't reckon he did either, he said quietly. And then, without hesitation, he took her hand, the simplest, surest thing he'd ever done. That night, the cabin glowed warm against the dark hills. The fire burned low, the baby slept soundly, and two hearts that had once been strangers now beat steady under the same roof. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain and cedar, whispering through the valley like a prayer answered. Because sometimes mercy didn't come with thunder or miracles. Sometimes it came in the shape of a woman knocking at a lonely man's door, and a love born from hunger, grief, and grace. And from that day on, the Turner Ranch was no longer a house of sorrow. It was a home called Hope.